Have you ever trusted someone so deeply that the thought of betrayal seemed impossible? That was me. I believed I had the perfect relationship, a boyfriend who felt like my soulmate and a family bond one could lean on. But life has a cruel way of pulling the rug out from under you when you least expect it. What if I told you that the person I loved, the man I thought I'd spend my life with, wasn't just cheating on me, but with someone from my own family? And not just anyone but my dad. Yeah, it sounds like the plot of a soap opera, right? But this isn't fiction. It's my reality. A shocking affair that turned my life into a whirlwind of betrayal, heartbreak, and questions I never thought I'd have to ask. How did I miss the signs? Why did they do this to me? And most importantly, how could I ever move on from a love betrayal that shook the very foundation of my world? Stick around because in this video, I'm taking you through every painful, messy, and eye-opening detail of my journey, from uncovering their hidden relationship to rebuilding myself after the emotional fallout. And trust me, by the end, you'll walk away with lessons that could change how you see love, trust, and even yourself. If this story hits close to home, or even if you're just here for the drama, don't forget to like this video and follow for more. And let me know in the comments, what's the biggest betrayal you've ever faced? Let's talk about it because healing starts when we open up. When I first met him, I genuinely thought I had hit the jackpot. You know that feeling when you think, wow, I've finally found someone who gets me. That was him. He wasn't just my boyfriend, he felt like my person. Charming, attentive, the kind of guy who would text good morning before I even opened my eyes and somehow remembered the little things like how I always needed extra whipped cream in my coffee. Felt like we were building something real, a future I could actually believe in. At first, our relationship was idyllic, like one of those rom-coms you can't stop watching. He was supportive, always hyping me up during my toughest moments. There were times when I'd sit back and think, how did I get so lucky? I mean, we all know relationships can have their ups and downs, but with him it was different. We clicked effortlessly. Or so I thought. It never crossed my mind that beneath the surface, there could be lies. Looking back now, the trust one had in him feels almost foolish. Trust issues. They weren't even a thought back then. Love betrayal wasn't something I ever considered, at least not in my world. He made me feel safe, like I could tell him anything and everything. That was my first mistake. But let me tell you something about trust. It's fragile, more delicate than we care to admit. In hindsight, I ignored the cracks. I wanted to believe in him so badly that I overlooked the little moments that didn't quite add up. Like the time he suddenly became super interested in spending more time with my family, especially my dad. At first I thought, how sweet, he's trying to bond. But now I realize how naive I was. He wasn't just my boyfriend. He was hiding a shocking affair, and I was completely in the dark. The thing is, we're taught to see the best in people, especially those we love. So, when he suggested we have more dinners at my parents' place or tag along with my dad on his morning runs, I didn't think twice. I was blind to the hidden secrets brewing right under my nose. Uncovering secrets like this wasn't even on my radar. Instead, I was dreaming of a future with him. A future I didn't know would be shattered. What I felt for him wasn't just love. It was that all-encompassing kind of affection where you picture growing old together, buying a house, maybe even adopting a dog. Family betrayal. It was a concept I read about, not something that could ever invade my life. Yet, little did I know, my own story would turn into the kind of betrayal story you wouldn't believe if it wasn't real. I thought I was living a fairy tale, but in reality, it was the prelude to a nightmare. And speaking of nightmares, let me just say, when you uncover something so shocking, so devastating, it shakes your world to its core. The emotional heartbreak that comes with realizing your relationship wasn't what you thought it was. It's like the ground beneath you crumbles, leaving you standing in the wreckage of trust, shattered into a million tiny pieces. That's where I found myself, facing a painful truth I never saw coming. The love I thought was solid, unbreakable, turned out to be nothing but a dramatic affair rooted in deception. A toxic relationship, hidden behind the mask of romance. But here's the kicker. The betrayal wasn't just his. No, this was deeper than I could have imagined. Because the man I loved, the one I thought I knew inside and out, wasn't just cheating with someone random. No. It was with someone I trusted just as much. My dad. The father-son dynamic I thought was innocent was anything but a forbidden romance that turned my life into a shocking family dynamic I couldn't escape. The painful truth of this hidden relationship would take everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and family, and crush it in ways I wasn't prepared for. And the worst part, I didn't just lose a boyfriend. I lost my sense of security, my ability to trust, and, for a long time, my faith in love itself. The emotional fallout wasn't just about him. It rippled through every aspect of my life. You know how people say, you'll heal, you'll move on. It's true, but what they don't tell you is how excruciatingly slow and messy that process can be. Emotional healing isn't linear, and when you're blindsided by something like this, it feels impossible to even take the first step forward. But before I get into how everything fell apart, let me tell you about my dad, the one person I thought I could always count on. That's where this story takes a turn you won't believe. Growing up, my dad was my rock. He wasn't just a father figure. He was my role model, my guide, my everything. To me, he was the kind of man who could do no wrong. He worked hard to give us a good life, always showing up at my school events, cheering me on at soccer games, and even helping me with college applications when I felt overwhelmed. He was the kind of dad everyone wishes they had. Kind, dependable, and present. Or at least that's what I thought. Looking back now, I wonder how much of what I saw was real and how much was just the facade of someone hiding hidden secrets. Our family wasn't perfect, whose is? But we were close enough. Sunday dinners were sacred in our house. My mom would cook up her famous lasagna, and my dad would make sure we all sat at the table together, no matter how busy life got. It was a tradition that kept us connected, a reminder that, no matter what, we had each other. My dad always had this way of making us laugh, even when the conversation got serious. He had these dad jokes, so bad they were actually funny, and a laugh that could light up the room. Trust issues. Not even a concept when it came to him. He was the last person I'd ever expect to be part of a betrayal story, let alone a love betrayal involving my boyfriend. I think that's what makes this all so hard to talk about. The fact that the person who betrayed me wasn't some distant acquaintance or a stranger I didn't care about. It was my dad. The man who taught me to ride a bike, who held my hand when I cried after my first heartbreak, and who told me that family always comes first. I trusted him implicitly, never imagining he could have a hidden relationship that would turn my world upside down. But here's the thing about family drama. It's often more complicated than it seems. My dad wasn't perfect, even though I idolized him. There were moments, small ones, that I brushed off at the time but now seem glaring. Like how he always seemed a little too friendly with my boyfriend. At first, I thought he was just being a cool dad, trying to connect with someone important to me. They'd joke around, share a beer during family barbecues, and talk about football like old pals. It didn't feel like a red flag back then, just two guys bonding. But now, those moments feel tainted, like pieces of a puzzle I didn't even know I was putting together. I remember one time specifically when my dad suggested that my boyfriend join him for an early morning run. At first, I thought it was strange. My dad wasn't the type to include anyone in his sacred workout routine. But I shrugged it off. They're just bonding, I told myself. Isn't that what you want? I ignored the family tension I felt creeping in, convincing myself it was all in my head. After all, my dad would never cross a line. Right. The emotional pain of realizing how wrong I was is something I wouldn't wish on anyone. My dad wasn't just my parent. He was my safety net. And that safety net, it's gone now, ripped away by his own actions. The painful truth is that I was blind to the signs because I didn't want to see them. Who would? When you love someone, you trust them, sometimes to your own detriment. And that's exactly what happened here. The family scandal that followed was something I couldn't have prepared for. The image I had of my dad, this strong, dependable, trustworthy man, was shattered. Trust issues. They became my new normal. Every conversation, every memory, felt tainted by the knowledge of what he'd done. And yet, part of me still wanted to hold on to the version of him I thought I knew. It's strange, isn't it? How we cling to the good memories, even when they're overshadowed by the bad. What made it even harder was the realization that my boyfriend had inserted himself into my family in a way I never questioned. He wasn't just dating me. He was infiltrating my life on a deeper level, building connections with the people I loved most. And my dad let him. They were in this together, creating a shocking family dynamic that blindsided me. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was a calculated, deliberate violation of trust. The father-son dynamic I once thought was innocent now feels like a cruel joke. Every memory of them laughing together, sharing inside jokes, feels like a slap in the face. It's hard to describe the emotional heartbreak that comes with realizing two of the people you trusted most were hiding something so toxic, so destructive, right under your nose. But the thing about hidden secrets is that they don't stay hidden forever. And when they come to light, they bring everything with them. The lies, the pain, the truth you weren't ready to face. That's where I found myself, standing in the wreckage of a relationship I thought was perfect and a family bond one thought was unbreakable. What came next would force me to confront everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and forgiveness. They say hindsight is 20/20, right? Looking back now, I can see all the signs staring me in the face, practically screaming at me to wake up. But when you're in the thick of it, when you love someone, you don't want to see what's wrong. You want to believe in the relationship, in the people you care about. And that's exactly what I did. I ignored the subtle signs, brushed off the uneasy feelings, and convinced myself that my boyfriend and my dad's close bond was nothing more than friendly camaraderie. Little did I know, it was the beginning of a toxic relationship that would unravel my life. The first red flag was how much time my boyfriend started spending with my dad. First, I thought it was sweet. I mean, isn't that what we want in a partner? Someone who tries to get along with our family, who makes an effort to connect with the people we love. But it wasn't just casual interactions. It was more than that. My boyfriend would suggest hanging out with my dad without me, offering to go to the hardware store with him or join him for a round of golf. And my dad. He seemed thrilled, which should have been reassuring, but deep down it felt off. One time they planned a fishing trip. Just the two of them. I remember feeling a twinge of jealousy, not because they were bonding, but because I felt excluded from my own relationship. Maybe I'm overthinking it, I told myself. This is just what men do. But something about the whole thing didn't sit right with me. I dismissed it, chalking it up to my insecurities, not realizing that those insecurities were my intuition trying to warn me. There were other moments, too, small, seemingly insignificant things that didn't add up. Like the way my boyfriend would light up when my dad entered the room, or how my dad would go out of his way to compliment him. I remember one specific dinner when my dad laughed a little too hard at one of my boyfriend's jokes. It wasn't a particularly funny joke, but the way they exchanged glances felt different. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it left me with a sinking feeling I couldn't explain. And then there was my boyfriend's phone. He was never secretive about it before, but suddenly, he started keeping it face down or taking it with him every time he left the room. One night, I noticed him texting someone late at night and smiling at his screen. When I asked who it was, he said, "Oh, just a friend." I wanted to trust him, I really did. But something about his tone felt rehearsed, like he'd already thought of the answer. The trust issues started creeping in at that point, but I ignored them. Why? Because the idea of uncovering secrets that could destroy everything we'd built was too terrifying to face. I convinced myself that I was being paranoid, that I was imagining things. After all, why would my boyfriend ever cheat on me? Let alone with someone in my family. Seemed unthinkable, impossible even. One afternoon, I overheard a conversation between my dad and my boyfriend. They were in the kitchen, speaking in hushed tones, and when I walked in, they both froze. The tension in the room was palpable, but when I asked what they were talking about, they shrugged it off as guy stuff. I laughed it off too, not realizing that their hidden relationship was unraveling right in front of me. The emotional pain of those moments didn't hit me until later, when I started piecing things together. At the time, I wanted so badly to believe in the image of a perfect relationship and a happy family that I ignored the cracks forming in both. My boyfriend's excuses, my dad's odd behavior, they were all part of a betrayal story I wasn't ready to acknowledge. Even my friends noticed things. One of my closest friends once asked me, "Don't you think it's weird how much your boyfriend and your dad hang out?" I laughed it off, saying, "They're just close. Isn't that a good thing?" But her words stuck with me. Somewhere deep down I knew she was right. Something wasn't adding up. But instead of confronting it, I buried my doubts, afraid of the painful truth I might uncover. What really stands out now is how I dismissed my own gut instincts. Every time I felt uneasy or noticed something strange, I found a way to rationalize it. I told myself that love required trust, that I was just being overly sensitive. But the truth, my gut knew what my heart wasn't ready to accept. That's the thing about hidden secrets. They have a way of creeping into your mind, planting little seeds of doubt that grow and grow until you can't ignore them anymore. And that's exactly where I found myself, standing on the edge of a discovery that would change everything. The family drama, the betrayal, the lies, they were all right there, waiting for me to finally open my eyes. And when I did, the shocking discovery was worse than anything I could have imagined. They say the truth always comes out, no matter how deeply buried. And let me tell you, when it does, it doesn't just knock on your door. It kicks it down, leaves it hanging off the hinges, and burns the whole house to the ground. That's how it felt when I uncovered the shocking affair between my boyfriend and my dad. Even now, thinking back to that moment, my stomach twists into knots. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was the kind of emotional heartbreak that splits your world into a before and after. And trust me, once you've crossed into the after, there's no going back. It started on a regular Tuesday, one of those days you think nothing significant will ever happen. I was at my dad's house, planning to surprise him with his favorite coffee on my way home from work. My boyfriend was busy, or so he claimed, so I thought I'd spend some time with my family. As I walked up the driveway, I noticed something odd. My dad's car parked unusually far back, almost hidden by the garage. It struck me as strange, but I brushed it off. Maybe he was rearranging things. I let myself in, as I'd done 100 times before, calling out, "Hey, Dad. It's me." But instead of the usual greeting, there was silence. My first thought was that he might be on a work call. He often worked from home, but something about the quiet felt off. As I made my way toward the kitchen, I noticed my dad's phone sitting on the counter, the screen lit up with a text. It wasn't like him to leave his phone out, especially unlocked. And the message, it was from my boyfriend. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Can't wait to see you again. Last night was amazing." My mind raced. Last night. Amazing. I stared at the screen, hoping, praying I was misunderstanding. Maybe it was a joke, a prank, something innocent blown out of proportion. But deep down I knew. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was the beginning of a betrayal story I never thought I'd be part of. I should have left right then and there. But instead I kept going. I needed to see for myself, needed to confirm what my gut was screaming at me. As I walked down the hallway, I heard laughter, familiar but out of place. My boyfriend's voice. My dad's voice. Together. It felt like my chest was caving in, each step heavier than the last. When I finally reached the living room, there they were, sitting too close, laughing too freely. It wasn't just friendly banter. It was something else entirely. "What the hell is going on here?" The words tumbled out before I could stop them. They froze, their laughter dying in an instant. My boyfriend's face turned pale, and my dad? He had the audacity to look surprised, as if I was the one out of line. The tension in the room was suffocating, the silence louder than any screaming match could have been. My boyfriend stammered first, his voice shaky. "It's not what it looks like. Isn't that what they always say?" But it was exactly what it looked like. The hidden relationship I'd been too blind or too trusting to see was staring me right in the face. And my dad. He didn't even try to deny it. Instead, he just sat there like a deer caught in headlights, saying nothing at all. That silence hurt more than any words ever could. I don't even remember what I said next. My voice was shaking, my hands trembling, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The emotional fallout was immediate, like a tidal wave crashing over me, pulling me under. The painful truth of their betrayal was more than I could process in that moment. The man I loved, the father I trusted, they had both destroyed the foundation of my life. I grabbed my things and stormed out, but not before hearing my dad call after me. "Let's talk about this." About what? The shocking discovery that my boyfriend and my dad had been sneaking around behind my back. The dramatic affair that they had somehow justified to themselves. No, I wasn't ready to talk. I needed space, air, anything but that. As I drove away, tears streaming down my face, I felt the full weight of the love betrayal. It wasn't just about my boyfriend cheating. It was about the family betrayal, the trust shattered between a father and daughter. I replayed every moment in my head, every interaction, every excuse they'd made. All the hidden secrets I'd ignored were now glaringly obvious. The fishing trips, the late-night texts, the hushed conversations, they were all part of this toxic relationship that had been right under my nose. That night I barely slept. My mind was racing, cycling through anger, sadness, disbelief, and back to anger again. How could they do this to me? How long had it been going on? And most painfully, why didn't I see it sooner? The emotional pain was unbearable, like a weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Every memory of my boyfriend, every laugh I'd shared with my dad, felt tainted. The shocking family dynamic they'd created had destroyed everything I thought I knew about love and loyalty. But the worst part wasn't the discovery itself. It was the questions it left behind. How had this started? Who made the first move? And most importantly, how was I supposed to face them again? These were the questions that would haunt me in the days to come, as I tried to make sense of the wreckage they'd left behind. Little did I know, the confrontation that awaited me would be even more devastating than the discovery itself. There's no manual for moments like this. No guidebook to tell you what to do when you have to confront the two people you trusted most. The two people who betrayed you in the most unforgivable way. All I knew was that I couldn't keep the anger, confusion, and heartbreak bottled up inside anymore. It was eating me alive. The confrontation wasn't something I planned. It just happened, raw and unfiltered, because how else do you face something this devastating? It started 2 days after I uncovered their affair. Those 2 days felt like a lifetime. I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. I just kept replaying every conversation, every glance, every little moment that suddenly seemed so obvious in hindsight. My mind was a tornado of emotions. Rage, sadness, disbelief, humiliation. And yet, deep down I knew I needed answers. The betrayal story I'd stumbled into wasn't complete. I needed to hear it from them, no matter how much it hurt. So I called them my dad first. His voice on the other end of the line was cautious, hesitant, like he already knew this wasn't going to end well. "We need to talk," I said, my voice trembling. Then, without waiting for his response, I added, "Both of you. Tonight." My boyfriend was next. When I told him to meet me at my dad's house, he hesitated, mumbling something about it not being the right time. "You made this mess," I snapped. "You're going to face it." That evening, as I pulled up to my dad's house, My hands were shaking so badly I had to sit in the car for a minute to steady myself. This wasn't just about confronting them. It was about standing up for myself, for the trust they had shattered, for the painful truth they had forced me to face. I walked up to the door, took a deep breath, and stepped inside. The atmosphere was thick with tension, the kind that makes your skin crawl. My dad was sitting on the couch, his head in his hands, while my boyfriend stood by the window, avoiding eye contact. It was like they were waiting for a bomb to go off, and I was the one holding the detonator. "Let's hear it," I said, breaking the silence. "How long has this been going on?" My voice was steady, but inside I was falling apart. My dad looked up, his eyes filled with something that looked like shame, or maybe it was just regret at getting caught. My boyfriend opened his mouth, but no words came out. The father-son dynamic I'd once admired now felt twisted, toxic, a cruel joke at my expense. "It's not what you think," my dad finally said. I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that didn't feel like my own. "Oh, really? So you weren't sneaking around behind my back? You weren't lying to me every single day?" The words spilled out of me, sharp and cutting, fueled by the emotional pain I'd been carrying since the shocking discovery. My boyfriend tried to jump in, his voice pleading. "Just happened. We didn't mean for this to," I cut him off. "Don't you dare say it just happened. Affairs don't just happen. You made choices. Both of you." My voice cracked, but I didn't care. The trust issues they'd planted in me would take years to undo, but in that moment, I wasn't going to let them twist the narrative. What followed was a mess of excuses, apologies, and half-truths. My dad claimed he was going through a midlife crisis, that he'd felt disconnected from the family and had found comfort in my boyfriend. My boyfriend, on the other hand, tried to paint himself as a victim of circumstance, saying he didn't know how to stop once it started. Their words blurred together, meaningless against the weight of what they'd done. The family drama that unfolded in that room was like something out of a soap opera, except it was my life. At one point I shouted, "Do you even understand what you've done? You didn't just betray me. You destroyed everything. Our family, our relationship, my trust. It's all gone." The emotional heartbreak of saying those words out loud was almost unbearable, but they needed to hear it. They needed to feel the weight of their actions. When I finally demanded to know how long it had been going on, the answer felt like another blow to the gut. Months. They'd been lying to me for months, carrying on their hidden relationship right under my nose. The fishing trips, the late-night texts, the whispered conversations, they were all part of this dramatic affair that had turned my life into a nightmare. By the end of it, I was drained. The confrontation had taken everything out of me, but it also gave me clarity. I wasn't going to get the closure I wanted from them. Their excuses, their guilt, it didn't matter. What mattered was that I could finally see them for who they were. Two people who had made selfish choices without any regard for the emotional fallout it would cause. As I walked out of that house, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger, yes. Sadness, absolutely. But also a sense of finality. The love betrayal, the shocking family dynamic, the toxic relationship. It was all laid bare. Now it was up to me to figure out what came next, how to pick up the pieces and start over. Because one thing was certain. I couldn't rely on them for anything, not anymore. And yet, as I drove away, the weight of the confrontation still lingered. The emotional healing I desperately needed felt so far out of reach, like a distant light at the end of a very dark tunnel. I knew this wasn't the end of the story. Far from it. The real challenge was just beginning. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't just hurt. It leaves a scar so deep it changes the way you see everything, including yourself. In the days following the confrontation, I felt like I was living in slow motion, as if the world was moving on while I was stuck, unable to escape the weight of my emotions. The emotional heartbreak wasn't just a wave. It was a storm, relentless and unforgiving. I'd heard people talk about trust issues before, but now I truly understood what it meant to have your trust shattered into a million unfixable pieces. The mornings were the worst. Waking up felt like a cruel joke because, for a few blissful seconds, I'd forget. Then, like clockwork, the memory would hit me. The shocking discovery, the hidden relationship, the dramatic affair between my boyfriend and my dad. It was a family betrayal that had seeped into every corner of my mind. The pain wasn't just emotional. It was physical. My chest felt tight, my stomach churned, and some nights I cried myself to sleep. The tears weren't just for the relationship I'd lost. They were for the person I used to be before all of this. I couldn't look at myself in the mirror without feeling like a fool. How could I have missed the signs? How could I have let myself trust so completely, only to be blindsided like this? The self-doubt was crippling. Every decision I'd made, every instinct I'd trusted, felt wrong. The toxic relationship I thought was love had left me questioning my own worth. Was I not good enough? Did I somehow deserve this? These thoughts were constant companions, whispering doubts in the quiet moments when I was alone. And the anger, that was its own beast. It bubbled under the surface, raw and unrelenting, waiting for the smallest trigger to explode. I was angry at my dad for crossing a line I never thought he'd cross. Angry at my boyfriend for the lies, the manipulation, the betrayal story he'd written without my consent. But most of all, I was angry at myself for not seeing it sooner. The emotional pain of realizing how deeply I'd been deceived was almost unbearable. My daily life became a minefield of triggers. A text notification would make my heart race, a reminder of how I'd discovered their affair. Driving past my dad's house felt like walking into a ghost town, every corner filled with memories that now felt tainted. Even my favorite coffee shop wasn't safe. It was where my boyfriend had once surprised me with flowers, a gesture that now felt like part of a twisted lie. The family drama that had unfolded wasn't just something I could walk away from. It was embedded in every aspect of my life. I tried to keep it together, to pretend I was fine when I wasn't. At work, I forced smiles, nodding along in meetings while my mind replayed every painful moment. Around friends, I laughed at their jokes, hoping they wouldn't notice the sadness in my eyes. But the emotional fallout was too heavy to hide for long. One evening, I broke down in front of my best friend, the tears coming in uncontrollable waves. "I don't even know who I am anymore," I admitted through sobs. She held me, letting me cry until the weight lifted just enough to breathe again. The trust issues weren't limited to my dad and my boyfriend. They bled into my other relationships too. I started questioning everyone's intentions, second-guessing every compliment, every kind gesture. If my own father and boyfriend could betray me, who else was capable of it? The idea of opening up to anyone felt impossible, like I was building a fortress around my heart to keep everyone out. It wasn't just love betrayal. It was a betrayal of my ability to trust anyone at all. But there was another layer to the pain, one I wasn't prepared for. The shame. Family scandals aren't just private. They have a way of becoming public, whether you want them to or not. Whispers started circulating, people asking questions I didn't want to answer. "Is it true? Did your boyfriend and your dad?" Their words trailed off, but their expressions said enough. The family tension was palpable, not just within our home but in the wider circle of friends and acquaintances. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like my life had become a cautionary tale for everyone around me. And yet, despite all the pain, there were moments, small, fleeting moments, when I felt a spark of hope. It was in the quiet conversations with my best friend, who reminded me that this wasn't my fault. It was in the long walks I took by myself, letting the fresh air fill my lungs and clear my mind. It was in the realization that, even though I felt broken, I was still here, still standing. Emotional healing felt like an impossible mountain to climb, but maybe, just maybe, I could take the first step. But before I could even think about moving forward, I had to face the reality of what this betrayal had done to my family, to the relationships I thought would always be unshakable. The shocking family dynamic created by their actions wasn't something I could fix on my own. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the ripple effects of their choices and how they'd changed everything I thought I knew about love and loyalty. I wasn't ready to forgive. I wasn't ready to move on. But I knew I couldn't stay in this place forever, trapped by anger and sadness. The next step wasn't clear, but one thing was certain. I had to find a way to reclaim my life, to rebuild myself from the ground up. Because no matter how deep the betrayal, I refused to let it define me. You never really think about how far-reaching a betrayal can be until you're in the middle of it. When the dust begins to settle, that's when you see the ripple effects. How a single act of betrayal doesn't just destroy trust between two people. It shatters an entire family and sends shockwaves through your social circle. For me, the family scandal that unfolded after my boyfriend's affair with my dad didn't just stay behind closed doors. It spilled out, staining everything it touched, from the relationships I valued to the way people saw me, and even how I saw myself. At first, I thought I could keep it quiet, deal with the betrayal story privately, without dragging everyone else into it. But secrets like this don't stay hidden for long. People talk. They always do. And when whispers about the shocking affair between my boyfriend and my dad started making their rounds, it was like being hit with a second wave of betrayal. Suddenly, it wasn't just my trust that had been shattered. It was my reputation, my family's image, and everything I'd tried to hold together. The questions came first, subtle at first, but then more direct. "Hey, are you okay? I heard something about your dad and..." They didn't even have to finish the sentence. I knew what they were hinting at, and the shame was like a weight pressing down on my chest. It wasn't just the betrayal itself that hurt. It was the realization that everyone around me knew about it. The family drama I'd been living with in private was now public knowledge, and it felt like everyone had an opinion about it. The social consequences were brutal. Friends who didn't know how to handle the situation began distancing themselves, afraid to say the wrong thing. Others acted like it was juicy gossip, asking invasive questions under the guise of being concerned. I even heard about co-workers speculating about it during lunch breaks, piecing together fragments of the story like it was some twisted puzzle. The emotional fallout from the betrayal was hard enough without the added pressure of knowing that my personal pain had become a spectacle. And then there was my family. The tension was unbearable. My mom, who was already struggling with her own feelings about my dad's betrayal, tried to play mediator, urging me to forgive and move forward. "Families go through tough times," she'd say, her voice cracking under the weight of her own pain. But how could I forgive something like this? How could I look at my dad without seeing the man who had destroyed the trust we'd spent years building? The father-daughter bond we once had felt irreparably broken, replaced by a wall of silence and resentment. Family gatherings became a battlefield. My siblings, who were caught in the crossfire, didn't know how to act around me or my dad. Some sided with me, refusing to even speak to him, while others tried to stay neutral, urging me to let it go for the sake of keeping the family together. The family scandal had turned us all against each other, creating a divide that felt impossible to bridge. Every dinner, every conversation was laced with tension, as though we were all waiting for the next explosion. But the hardest part was facing my dad. Every time I saw him, I felt a mix of anger and sadness, like I was mourning the man I thought he was. He'd try to talk to me, to explain himself, but his words felt hollow. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he said once, his voice heavy with guilt. But intentions didn't matter. The damage was done. The shocking family dynamic he'd created with my boyfriend wasn't something words could fix. And honestly, I didn't want his apologies. I wanted my life back, the life I had before everything fell apart. The social consequences weren't limited to my friends and family. They seeped into every corner of my life, even affecting the way strangers saw me. I started noticing the way people looked at me differently, like I was somehow tainted by the betrayal. It wasn't fair. I wasn't the one who had lied, who had cheated, who had broken trust. But in a scandal like this, guilt has a way of spreading to everyone involved, whether they deserve it or not. The emotional heartbreak wasn't just about the betrayal itself. It was about the isolation that came with it. There were days when I felt completely alone, like no one could possibly understand what I was going through. Even the people who tried to comfort me couldn't fully grasp the depth of the pain, the humiliation, the loss. This wasn't just a breakup or a family argument. It was a toxic relationship that had infected every aspect of my life, leaving me to pick up the pieces on my own. And yet, even in the midst of all the chaos, there were moments of clarity. I began to see who really had my back and who didn't. Friends who stuck by me, who didn't ask questions but simply showed up, became my lifeline. My best friend, in particular, was a constant source of support. "This doesn't define you," she'd remind me whenever I felt like the betrayal story was all anyone saw. "You're stronger than this." Her words didn't erase the pain, but they gave me the strength to keep going, one day at a time. The family scandal, the hidden secrets, the social fallout, it all felt overwhelming, like a tidal wave threatening to pull me under. But I knew I couldn't let it consume me. There was more to my story than this betrayal, more to me than the emotional pain they'd caused. And while I didn't know what the future held, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let their actions define me. The journey to healing wasn't going to be easy, but it was one I had to take, no matter how hard it felt. And as I began to take those first steps, I realized that healing wasn't just about moving on. It was about rebuilding. Rebuilding my sense of self, my trust in others, and my ability to see beyond the pain. The betrayal had left scars, yes, but those scars were part of my story now. And they would lead me to a place of strength I never knew I had. If there's one thing I learned through this entire ordeal, it's that healing doesn't happen in isolation. I thought I could handle it all on my own, that if I just kept my head down I could push through the emotional pain and come out on the other side. But I was wrong. The betrayal was too heavy to carry alone. The family betrayal, the shocking affair, the toxic relationship, they had all left wounds so deep that pretending to be okay only made them worse. I needed help, even if admitting that felt like its own kind of defeat. The first person I turned to was my best friend. She had been there through every chapter of my life, but even she was stunned when I told her about the hidden relationship between my boyfriend and my dad. I remember her face when I finally blurted it out. Half disbelief, half fury. "Are you serious? Your dad and your boyfriend?" she asked, her voice dripping with outrage. All I could do was nod, the tears streaming down my face. She didn't hesitate. She wrapped me in a hug, and for the first time since the discovery, I felt a tiny sliver of relief. Someone else knew. I wasn't carrying this alone anymore. Talking to her was like opening the floodgates. I told her everything. The shocking discovery, the confrontation, the family tension that had turned every interaction into a minefield. She listened, never interrupting, never judging, just letting me unload all the emotions I'd been bottling up. By the time I finished, I felt lighter, like some of the weight had been lifted from my chest. "You're stronger than you think," she said, her voice firm. "But you don't have to do this alone. Let me help." Those words were a lifeline, a reminder that even in the midst of betrayal, I wasn't completely alone. But as comforting as her support was, I knew I needed more. The trust issues that had taken root in me weren't going to disappear overnight, and neither was the emotional fallout from the betrayal. So I took a step I never thought I'd take. I started therapy. It wasn't an easy decision. Part of me felt like going to therapy was admitting defeat, like it was proof that I wasn't strong enough to handle this on my own. But the truth, therapy was the best decision I ever made. In those early sessions, I barely knew where to start. How do you even begin to explain a betrayal like this? But my therapist was patient, guiding me through the tangled mess of emotions I'd been carrying. She helped me see that the love betrayal, the shocking family dynamic, wasn't my fault. I hadn't caused this. I hadn't deserved it. And most importantly, I wasn't defined by it. Slowly, we began to untangle the web of pain, one thread at a time. One thing she taught me that stuck with me was the importance of self-compassion. I'd spent so much time blaming myself, wondering what I could have done differently, replaying every moment in my head, trying to pinpoint where I went wrong. But she helped me see that healing wasn't about fixing the past. It was about accepting it and finding a way to move forward. You can't change what they did, she told me, but you can decide how it shapes you. Alongside therapy, I leaned heavily on the few friends and family members who stayed by my side. Not everyone could handle the family scandal. Some people distanced themselves, unsure of what to say or how to help. But the ones who stayed, they were my rock. They didn't need to understand the full depth of the betrayal to support me. Sometimes just sitting with me in silence, letting me cry without judgment was enough. I also started journaling. It sounds cliché, I know, but there's something about putting your thoughts on paper that makes them feel less overwhelming. Every night, I'd write about what I was feeling. Anger, sadness, confusion, even moments of hope. I didn't hold back. The pages became a safe space where I could process everything without fear of judgment. And over time I noticed a shift. The words that once dripped with pain and heartbreak began to carry hints of resilience, of strength I didn't know I had. One of the hardest but most important steps was setting boundaries. The family betrayal had created a toxic dynamic that I couldn't ignore, and I had to make the painful decision to distance myself from my dad for a while. It wasn't about punishing him, it was about protecting myself. I needed space to heal, to rebuild my sense of self without the constant reminder of what he'd done. It wasn't easy, and there were days when I questioned whether I was doing the right thing. But every time I doubted myself, I reminded myself of one simple truth. Healing isn't selfish. The toxic relationship with my boyfriend was, of course, over. But letting go of him completely was harder than I expected. Even though I hated what he'd done, part of me still clung to the version of him I thought I knew. That's the thing about love betrayal. It's not just about losing the person you loved. It's about losing the future you thought you'd have with them. Letting go of that future was like mourning a death, and it took time. But little by little I began to let go. As I worked through the emotional pain, I also started rediscovering the things that made me happy. I picked up hobbies I'd abandoned like painting and hiking. I spent more time with friends not talking about the betrayal, but simply enjoying their company. I even took a solo trip to the mountains. A small but significant step toward reclaiming my independence. Each of these moments, small as they were, reminded me that there was still joy to be found, even in the midst of pain. Healing wasn't linear, and it wasn't easy. There were setbacks, days when the weight of the betrayal felt unbearable. But with each passing day, the emotional healing felt a little more within reach. I began to see that while I couldn't change what had happened, I could choose how I responded to it. And that choice, to seek support, to lean on the people who loved me, to invest in myself, was what ultimately saved me. But the journey wasn't over yet. The next step was figuring out how to rebuild my life, how to move forward without letting the betrayal define me. And that, I knew, was going to be the hardest part of all. Moving on after a betrayal like this isn't as simple as people make it sound. It's not just about waking up one day and deciding you're over it. No, it's messy, exhausting, and sometimes it feels impossible. But little by little, I began to understand that moving on wasn't about forgetting what had happened. It was about choosing not to let it define me. And that choice, it became the foundation for everything I would rebuild. The first step was accepting that healing wasn't linear. Some days I felt strong, like I could take on the world. Other days I could barely get out of bed. And that was okay. I stopped pressuring myself to be okay for other people and started focusing on what I needed. At first it felt selfish, but my therapist reminded me that self-care isn't selfish. It's survival. So I gave myself permission to grieve, to feel the emotional heartbreak fully, without rushing to move past it. One of the hardest parts was rediscovering who I was outside of the relationship and the family dynamic that had been shattered. For so long, my identity had been tied to my boyfriend and my family. I'd built my life around them, trusting that they'd always be there. But the love betrayal and the family scandal forced me to confront a painful truth. I'd lost myself somewhere along the way. So, I started asking myself questions I hadn't thought about in years. What do I love? What makes me happy? What kind of life do I want to build for myself? I began to rebuild my sense of self in small, intentional ways. I signed up for a yoga class, not because I thought it would fix everything, but because I needed something to focus on other than my pain. At first, I felt out of place, like everyone around me had their lives together while mine was in shambles. But with each session, I felt a little stronger, a little more in tune with myself. It wasn't just about the physical practice. It was about finding a moment of peace in the chaos. Another step was setting boundaries. The family tension that had erupted after the betrayal was unbearable, and I knew I couldn't heal while constantly being pulled back into the drama. So, I made the difficult decision to distance myself from my dad. It wasn't about punishment. It was about creating space for myself to process everything without his presence complicating things. At first, it felt like another loss, like I was losing my family on top of everything else. But over time, I realized that the distance was necessary. It gave me room to breathe, to think, to heal. Letting go of my boyfriend was another battle entirely. Even though I knew I could never forgive him, part of me still clung to the version of him I'd fallen in love with. That's the cruel thing about love betrayal. It doesn't just end when the relationship does. It lingers, haunting you with memories of what could have been. But slowly, I began to separate the man he was from the man I'd imagined him to be. He wasn't the partner I deserved, and clinging to him was only holding me back. I also started focusing on the things I could control. The hidden relationship, the shocking affair, the emotional pain. They were all out of my hands. But what I could control was how I responded to them. So I set goals for myself, small ones at first. Drink more water. Go for a walk every day. Spend 10 minutes journaling. These tiny acts of self-care felt insignificant at first, but they added up. They reminded me that I still had agency, that I could still take steps toward the life I wanted. As I rebuilt myself, I began to see the hidden strength I hadn't realized I had. The family betrayal had knocked me down, but it hadn't destroyed me. The toxic relationship had left scars, but those scars became a reminder of what I'd survived. And slowly I started to feel proud of myself, not just for enduring the pain, but for choosing to move forward despite it. One of the most transformative moments came when I decided to reclaim my narrative. For so long, the betrayal story had defined me. It was the first thing I thought about in the morning and the last thing on my mind at night. But I didn't want to live like that anymore. So, I started reframing the story, not as something that happened to me but as something I overcame. It wasn't just a shocking family dynamic. It was a turning point that forced me to grow in ways I never thought possible. I also leaned into gratitude, not for the betrayal, of course, but for the people and moments that had helped me along the way. My best friend who never let me feel alone. My therapist who helped me untangle the mess of emotions I'd been carrying. The quiet mornings when I'd sit with my coffee and feel a glimmer of hope for the future. Gratitude didn't erase the pain, but it softened it, reminding me that even in the darkest moments, there were still things worth holding on to. Rebuilding myself wasn't about pretending the betrayal hadn't happened. It was about finding a way to live with it without letting it consume me. I started setting new goals, dreaming new dreams. I thought about the kind of person I wanted to be, the kind of life I wanted to create. And slowly, step by step, I began to move toward it. But moving on isn't just about looking forward. It's also about reflecting on the lessons you've learned. The betrayal taught me things I never wanted to learn, but they were lessons I couldn't ignore. They reshaped the way I saw love, trust, and resilience. And as I prepared to take the next steps in my journey, I knew that those lessons would stay with me, guiding me as I continued to rebuild. Because the truth is, the betrayal didn't break me. changed me, yes, but it also made me stronger. And while I couldn't see it at the time, that strength would become the foundation for the next chapter of my life. They say every experience, no matter how painful, comes with a lesson. But let me be honest, when you're in the middle of the heartbreak, the betrayal, the emotional wreckage, it's hard to believe anything good can come from it. For the longest time, I couldn't see past the pain. All I could focus on was the betrayal story that had consumed my life. The love betrayal, the shocking affair, the hidden relationship that shattered everything I thought I knew about trust and loyalty. But as the months passed and I began to heal, I realized that this experience, as devastating as it was, had taught me lessons I couldn't have learned any other way. The first and hardest lesson: trust is precious, but it shouldn't be given blindly. I used to believe that love meant unconditional trust, that if you cared about someone you gave them your all. But this betrayal showed me that trust is something people earn, not something you hand over freely. It doesn't mean I'll never trust again, but now I understand the importance of boundaries, of protecting myself without shutting people out completely. It's a delicate balance, but one I'm learning to navigate. Another painful truth I had to accept was that people aren't always who you think they are. My dad and my boyfriend, they were two of the most important people in my life. I thought I knew them inside and out, that their actions would always align with the love they professed for me. But this betrayal forced me to confront the reality that even the people closest to you can have hidden sides, hidden secrets. It's a harsh lesson, but one that's made me more aware, more discerning about who I let into my life. One of the most unexpected lessons was about self-worth. When the betrayal first came to light, I questioned everything about myself. Was I not good enough? Did I do something to deserve this? The emotional pain of those questions was almost unbearable. But through therapy, self-reflection, and the support of people who truly cared about me, I began to see the truth. Their betrayal wasn't a reflection of my worth. It was a reflection of their choices, their flaws. And once I understood that, I stopped blaming myself. Instead, I started focusing on building a relationship with myself, one rooted in love and respect. This experience also taught me the importance of resilience. There were days when I didn't think I'd make it through, when the family scandal, the trust issues, the shocking family dynamic felt too heavy to bear. But every time I got back up, even when it felt impossible, I proved to myself that I was stronger than I realized. Resilience isn't about never falling. It's about finding the strength to rise again, no matter how many times life knocks you down. Another lesson: healing isn't something you do alone. I used to think asking for help was a sign of weakness, that I needed to face my pain on my own to prove I was strong. But the truth is, strength isn't about isolation. It's about knowing when to lean on others. Whether it was my best friend, my therapist, or even a stranger's kind words, the support I received reminded me that I wasn't alone, even when it felt like the world was against me. This experience also reshaped the way I view forgiveness. For a long time, I thought forgiveness meant letting someone off the hook, pretending the betrayal didn't matter. But now I see forgiveness differently. It's not about them, it's about me. It's about letting go of the anger, the bitterness, the resentment that was weighing me down. Forgiving my dad and my ex wasn't easy, and I'm still working on it. But I've realized that forgiveness is less about them deserving it and more about me deserving peace. One of the most important lessons I learned was about the power of boundaries. The family tension that followed the betrayal was unbearable at times, but it taught me the value of protecting my energy, my space, my peace. Setting boundaries with my dad, even though it hurt, was one of the most empowering things I've ever done. It reminded me that it's okay to prioritize myself, to say no when something doesn't feel right. Boundaries aren't walls, they're bridges to healthier, more authentic relationships. But perhaps the biggest lesson of all was this: I am not defined by what happened to me. For a long time, I let the betrayal story consume me, thinking it was the only thing people would see when they looked at me. But this experience has taught me that while the betrayal is part of my story, it's not the whole story. I am so much more than what happened to me. I am resilient, I am strong, and I am capable of creating a life that's filled with love, trust, and joy, even after everything I've been through. As I look back on this journey, I see how far I've come. The toxic relationship, the love betrayal, the emotional pain, they've all shaped me, but they haven't broken me. If anything, they've made me stronger, more self-aware, more compassionate toward myself and others. And while I wouldn't wish this experience on anyone, I can say with certainty that it's given me a deeper understanding of who I am and what I'm capable of. So, if you're going through something similar, know this. It gets better. The road to healing is long, and it's not always smooth, but it's worth it. You are worth it. And while the pain may feel overwhelming now, it doesn't define you. What defines you is how you choose to rise, to rebuild, to move forward. Because at the end of the day, you are so much stronger than you think. And your story is just beginning. Betrayal has a way of breaking you down, but here's the thing. It can also build you back up, stronger and more resilient than you ever thought possible. You've heard my story. The heartbreak, the family scandal, the trust shattered into a million pieces. And while it's easy to let something like this define you, the real power comes from choosing to rise above it. Healing isn't easy and it isn't quick, but it is worth it. And trust me, so are you. Now it's your turn. What's stopping you from taking that first step toward rebuilding yourself? Is it the fear of letting go? The uncertainty of what's next? Whatever it is, don't let it hold you back. You have the strength to face it head-on just like I did. And remember, healing isn't about forgetting. It's about learning, growing, and deciding that your future will be better than your past. If this story resonated with you, don't just sit with it. Act on it. Leave a comment below and tell me, what's one thing you're ready to let go of today? And while you're here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Let's keep growing, healing, and navigating life's messiness together. You've got this, and I'll be right here with you for every step of the journey.